Hello, welcome back to Artsy-Island-Girl. Today I'm going to do a beach resin piece that is a non-traditional color. So the first thing I do with my wood panel is I use a finishing wax and rub it all over the back surface. And the reason I do this is because after the piece is completely done, this is going to make taking the resin drips off so much easier. So I have my resin mixed. I am just adding Casting Craft white to one of my containers, so I have the white for the waves, and then I am using some playbox sand that I just got from Home Depot to mix in with a different container of resin. I have some ice resin gold glass glitter flakes, and I also have some silver glass glitter chunks that I am adding to it just to give it a little bit of sparkle and interest. So you want to mix that really well. I usually have my resin in the container before I add the stuff to it so that I don't have dry chunks of sand at the bottom of it when I'm finished. So I also am using some Prima mica powders to add two different colors to my ocean. So I have a dark cherry and I have an opal lilac magic. The opal lilac magic, I added a little bit of the dark cherry to it so that it had a bit of more of a pink tone. So the first thing I am doing is I am putting my sand resin mixture along the bottom of the piece. And when I do it, I want to make sure to go over the sides to keep it nice and even. When you go over the sides with your hand, covered in a glove, it helps to keep the resin drips a little bit more even along the edge so that you don't have big chunky drips right on the edge of your piece. So now I'm doing the dark cherry color, getting as much of it out of the container as possible. We don't want to waste any. And I'm going to spread it a little bit with my stir stick. I'm trying to keep as much resin off my hands for as long as possible. There is a point where I'm going to have to start touching it, but trying to delay that. And now I'm using my lighter pink color. And again, getting as much out of the container as possible so that we're not wasting it. And again, using my stir stick to spread it around a little bit. These are silicone stir sticks that I got off of Amazon, so once the resin dries off them, it's going to be easy to pick little bits off of it so that I can reuse them over and over again. So again, I'm using my hand, spreading the resin over as much as possible. I just have a little bit more control when I use my hands rather than using one of the silicone tools, making sure that the sides are covered nice and evenly. Again, on all four sides. And then I'm also going to mix the two colors together a little bit so that I don't have that strong line right across it. And once I have that spread and down the sides as much as I can, I'm going to use some clear resin and put a line of clear between the pink and between the sand. And I don't know why this works better, but by doing this, it just helps the white spread out a little bit better over top of the pink color. So once that white is done, I'm making sure that it's spreading down the sides evenly. Now I'm putting my line of white resin along the beach edge. And I want to make sure it's nice and even. And again, I want to make sure that it's going down the sides a little bit. So I'm going to use my heat gun with its regular nozzle on a low setting. And I'm just removing the bubbles out of the resin. As it sits, they rise to the top, and I want to remove as many as possible. Once that's done, I put my fine tip on, and then I'm going to go positioning the gun as horizontal to the piece as possible, and I'm blowing the white out. Once I have it blown out from the edge, I just blow it out a little bit more onto the pink. And then I didn't like as much white as I had, so I wanted to add a little bit more to it. So once I've added that second line of white, I'm going to blow it out again with my heat gun with the fine tip nozzle. And then I typically use one of my clean silicone sticks or a toothpick, and within the first couple hours, I regularly rub along the bottom to remove the excess drips below. It's just gonna make less to clean up later. While the resin is still wet, I'm gonna add my sand dollars, starfish, seashells. Some of these I've gotten at the dollar store, some of them I've gotten off of Amazon. I just kind of accumulate them when I see them. And by doing it in the wet resin, it's going to help make sure that they stay on there. That way you don't have to glue them on afterwards and hope that the adhesive sticks. So here's the second day. I am mixing my colors. I've already mixed my burgundy and pink. I'm adding my Cast and Craft white to another container so that I have my white for my waves. The only thing I'm not mixing today is the sand mixture. I don't need to do that again. I've already got one layer. I don't need any more. So these layers, as I add them, they're just going to add extra dimension, and the wave will just have a bit of a raised edge to it, which is what I want, and which is why I typically add several layers. So again, I'm going to add the darkest color to the farthest edge. And then I am adding my pink color. Getting as much of the out of the container as possible. I'm going to rub it with my latex glove protected hand, smoothing it along all the edges so that it drips down the edge of the wood board evenly. And I'm also mixing the two colors together a little bit so that I don't have a line between the two colors in the water there. Once I have it mixed as much as I want, I take some of the excess resin off my hand, add my clear layer along the edge of the beach. Again, making sure that it runs down the edge of the wood board as evenly as possible. Any pieces that are not running down the edge of the board, I fix them right now, and then I add my white line. And also want to make sure that that is going down the side as well. For this particular layer, I added a few extra little white lines within the ocean part. They're going to be blown out. There are going to be layers on top of this. This is just going to add a little bit more interest and dimension to it, because you'll be able to see through the layers that go over top, and you'll be able to see a little bit of white below it. It's just going to break some of the monotony out of it. Once those layers on the outside or within the ocean are blown out, I do my edge and I blow it out as far as possible. Now this is going to continue to move as it dries, but you just control as much as you can. So this is the third day. I actually didn't use the dark cherry color for this one. I only used the lilac opal color for the resin. I also have my clear, and I also have my white. There is going to be one extra layer on top of this afterwards, but I was just curious what this was going to look like if I didn't include the burgundy to it. And again, going along the sides with your gloved hand. You have to definitely want to make sure that you're wearing gloves for this, because resin, while it's still curing, it's toxic, and it's also really hard to get off your hands, and some people have allergic reactions to them, so you want to make sure that you're protected in that way. Now I'm using my heat gun with the wide tip on the low setting and removing the air bubbles, and then once that is done, I take my fine tip and blow my waves out, again trying to keep the heat gun as horizontal to the piece as possible so that they blow out a little bit farther. You have a little bit more control. And adding a little bit of white. I always find when I blow it out, there's not enough white along the edges, so I typically add more. You don't need to. There's some people that don't. It's not required. I just typically do it because I always mix too much white, so I have it, so I just add it anyways. This particular day I'm using a baker's torch, and I am blowing out, or I'm running it over the piece, and what that does is it typically makes the white cells pop a little bit more. And then this is the 4th day. I've got my 2 colors mixed as well as my white and my clear. I'm doing a 3rd and final layer of waves. You can see the coaster mold along the side. Typically, if I have extra resin that I don't need to use for a piece, I'll just take one of my excess molds and I'll just pour the extra resin in there and just kind of see what it does. It's a good way to not waste the resin, and it's also a good way to just play and see how it moves in different situations. It's fascinating to see how it moves and changes while it's curing. Once again, going along the edges and making sure that it's dripping as evenly as possible down the side. And then doing my clear layer. And then finally my white layer. So the epoxy that I'm using for this is Moss Epoxy's tabletop resin. And the nice thing about this particular resin, it has less VOCs than house paint. So you typically don't need to have a respirator on for it. Some resins are completely toxic while they are in their fluid state, so you need to have a respirator on to protect yourself. I do it in our kitchen right by the sliding door, so I always have it open so there's enough ventilation, and it has no smell to it, so it's fantastic. So now I've got my heat gun with the fine nose because I've already used the wide tip and blown out all the little bubbles that have accumulated. So now I'm using the fine tip and I am blowing out the waves. And then I didn't really like the way the edges looked here, so I went and fiddled with them a little bit later, using the blowtorch to make those cells pop. I typically only do the blowtorch with the last couple layers because those are really the layers that you see. The under layers, you don't really see them. So I tend to not do it then. And it's one of those things that I find myself, I don't see the effect of it while I'm doing it. I only see it after it started curing a little bit. So now I'm just making sure the edge is how I like it before it starts to cure, because once it starts to thicken up and cure, you can't really change it too much. So that is how the cells look once they are completely dried and cured and they've really popped. So these are the resin drips that have accumulated, even though I keep taking the excess off. So they're super easy to remove. You just take your heat gun and heat up the resin that's on the bottom there, and then use a paint scraper to remove them. And it comes off super clean because we did the wax finish at the very, very beginning. The wax itself kind of heats up a little bit and it just releases. So it comes off really nice and clean. And it's really quite satisfying to do as well. And I'm using the heat gun with the regular tip. I don't use the fine tip, I just use the regular tip. Just do it little bit by little bit. And then it comes off completely clean. And your piece is done. You can add a hanger to it to hang it or leave it as is. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this, please subscribe to see more.